Hi, this is Gary Bowles, based in San Francisco. I'm really excited about bringing big ideas to people inside organizations, and I'm really honored to show you these videos by John Hagel and John Seely Brown. Enjoy.
If we go back to where we started out in terms of power of pull is meant to find ways to kind of unleash a form of passion. I think we ought to kind of come back to that point now and talk about how institutional innovation and the power of pull come together toward really reshaping the chance of creating a workscape where passion gets honored in a much more profound way.
Right. Well, passion's an interesting topic. I think that most executives will say, salute the flag and say they want to stimulate more passion. And yet when you think about it...
most employees will also say that, but...
Yes.
But go ahead.
But it turns out that when you actually look at the day-to-day practices in large institutions, they're built around the notion of predictability. And part of the problem is that passion, if really pursued passionately, is not very predictable. It leads people into totally unexpected directions and domains. And so there's this curious tension within most institutions about, do we really want passion? We want people to be passionate about their assigned roles and their programs that they have to pursue, but God forbid they move beyond that. I think one of the things we found in the Shift Index, which was really very interesting, and yet most executives look at it kind of askance, is first of all the notion that when you actually measure passion, and I should say, we're not talking about happiness or satisfaction. We're talking about passion, deep engagement, and commitment to the work you're doing. The levels of passion are actually very low across most companies today. It's maximum of 20 to 25% of the workforce, depending on what industry you're looking at, that are really passionate about their work. And curiously, the most passionate people are those who are outside the institutions, who are working on their own. They're the ones who are much more passionate than the ones inside large institutions.
I think it's also interesting to note that the passionate individual, even the passionate startup, is willing to work an amazing amount of time, but feels totally fulfilled by that, because in what they are constructing, they're actually constructing part of their identity.
Right.
And so it's not, I have a life outside and a life inside, but in fact I'm kind of crafting a sense of being, a sense of becoming, a sense of identity that is really built around really very strong, powerful foundations of making things happen that I really personally care about.
Right. And a core theme in our book is this notion of moving from stress to stimulus, and a key element of that is this notion of passion. We've been brought up in a world where we were taught to believe that you go to work, you get a job, not because you're passionate about it, but because you need a paycheck to fund your passion after hours, whether it's a sport or a hobby or whatever. But don't look for passion in your work, look for it outside of work. If that's the case, if you're just working for the paycheck and not really passionate about what you're doing, and this pressure keeps mounting on you, you're going to feel a ton of stress, and you're ultimately going to get burnt out, and you're going to get marginalized and squeezed out.
And also a lack of dignity in what you're doing.
And complete lack of dignity. So part of our advice to individuals is, however you do it, you have to find a way to reintegrate passion and profession. You need to make your profession a passionate quest for yourself. And an interesting thing happens if you start to do that, which is the notion that when something unexpected happens, a challenge emerges, suddenly your frame is very different. You're not looking at that as something that to be avoided or minimized. You seek it out, because now if you're really passionate, this is an opportunity to challenge yourself, to test yourself. How would I do this? How would I overcome this? And you reach out to other people to figure out how to do that.
And this also requires a willingness to have a dimension of curiosity.
Yes.
In terms of looking around the world, looking at other people and what's going on, and actually being willing to experiment. So you don't suddenly magically zero in on your passion. I mean, this is its own kind of complex walk,
Yes.
so to speak.
it can evolve over time. There are lots of different techniques and ways you can discover that passion and begin to reintegrate. But our key message is, one way or another, if you don't figure that out, if you don't reintegrate passion and profession, you're going to live in a world of unbearable stress. Over time, you will just drop out. And so it's critical. I think part of what's interesting too in the Shift Index was our finding that if you have real passion around your work, there's a very strong correlation with your connection to other people, whether it's attending conferences, whether it's participation in social media. The passionate worker is much more connected than the disengaged worker. And so if you take our notion that flows are becoming increasingly central to success, if you're not passionate about your work, you're not going to participate in flows in the way you need to be successful.
In fact, it's interesting to me to see how many of these ideas predated the interest in things like social media, a la Facebook or et cetera, or actually, because folks that were really passionately engaged, in my particular case, around rebuilding certain types of engines for motorcycle racing and car racing, they, without even telling anybody, you scratch the surface there and you find these vast networks have been built. They were finding one way or another, even going back to the well, to use some of the simplest social media tools before we even had the term social media, to be able to stay connected with each other, to pass ideas back and forth, try out ideas, come together on weekends periodically in certain garages and so on.
Right, no, for sure. And I think another thing that happens as you develop this passion in your profession is you're naturally drawn to the edge. You're drawn to peripheries where you get more challenge in terms of how do you develop your passion even further, your skills and capabilities around the passion even further. So there's kind of a natural movement out to the most relevant edges, which again, from our perspective, is absolutely essential for institutions to start to transform themselves. They have to pull the people that are passionate out to these edges.
Right, and you notice this most in extreme sports. Coming just off of the Winter Olympics, you saw this, that if you stay just doing the same thing that they did last year, you have diminishing returns nevertheless, even if you get all this group type of learning.
Right.
But what you really find is these kids on the edge are pushing the edge out.
Right.
And redefining or making fundamentally new, impossible moves.
Yes.
Around which then they really focus their passion. And so you find kind of an interesting dynamic in terms of a constant shifting there, which goes back to the very notion that we're not just moving from one fixed point to another, but one, we're moving to something where the edge is always going to keep moving, and it's going to be moving in non-linear ways at times.
Right. No, absolutely. So as much as executives tend to look at us somewhat strangely when we bring up the topic of passion, it really is a central element to how do we make this transition to the world of pull. Ultimately, you're only going to be successful with pull if you're passionate about what you're doing, and that's a key takeaway from the work we're doing